Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 28. Just checking your part 28 of our reading of The Natural History of Dragon. Oh, A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent. It is a book by Marie Brennan. We're almost done with this book, and we're going to go over the copyright information, which clearly is A Natural History of Dragons, copyright 2013 by Bryn Noonschwander. All rights reserved. Interior illustrations by Todd Lockwood, maps by Rhys Davies, and designed by Greg Collins. Anyways, in the last part, Jacob died from his stab wound, and Kurzov and his men actually found the the small group of people, Dagmira Iljish, Mr. Wilker, and Lady Trent, otherwise known as Isabel Camhurst, and her husband, who is dead, and Hilford, Lord Hilford. And so she ran. She ended up finding Astamir with a rifle, who was wielding a rifle, and she convinced him to help, since he started the whole thing or something like that. Anyways, we are going to continue where we left off, which is, we don't have very many pages left here. Okay, wow. Okay. Okay. I honestly cannot tell you whether I remembered to speak in Vestrani or not. It may have just been my tone sufficed all on its own. Astamir stumbled through the brush, and then I sallied after him, driven by grief and rage, past the bounds of rationality into a soaring state, wherein I had lost all capacity for fear. My husband lay dead on the ground. I must do something more than run. As if to give voice to my rage, from above came a furious, inhuman scream. I had indeed managed to attract a dragon, and a very angry one at that. The ruined wall blocked my view of what happened on the ground. I saw only the penultimate stage of the dragon's stoop and heard shots ringing from below. The worm screamed again, this time in pain. Either none of the Boyer's men had made it this far in pursuit of me, or they had just gone past in their search. I swarmed up the wall, thinking the unexpected vantage point would give me a degree of protection from any guns. And looking down to the ground beyond, the dragon was thrashing about, too wounded to regain the air. Its blood seemed to be everywhere, and the fanatic beating of its wings and quick whipping of its head and tail made it almost impossible to parse the scene. I saw one of the soldiers half behind a tree taking aim for the dragon once more. Then I spotted Mr. Wilker across the way, crouching for cover. A sudden twist of the dragon's body revealed Kurzov lying motionless, and my heart gave a savage leap, but it turned to pain a moment later as the soldier shot, and the beast suddenly collapsed in the dirt, dead. A banshee howl from just below me dragged my gaze downward. Heaven knows only what had gone through Astamir's head during those days hiding in the ruins. I think it had rather unhinged him. I doubt it was any sort of vengeance for the fallen dragon, or even for us, that made him aim for the soldier and shoot. Whatever motivated him, the bullet struck true. The Boyer's man cried out and toppled backward down the slope. But there were still others now emerging from cover, and then I heard a snarl from behind me. I twisted to see Rossi halfway up the wall, his discolored face contorted into an expression of animal fury. He was close enough to snatch at my foot, braced against the stone. I drew it up just in time, but he caught a handful of my skirt, and only a desperate clutch at the wall kept me from falling. I kicked out twice, 3 times, and struck his hand hard enough against a rock to make him swear and let go. Then I scrambled higher, drawing myself fully onto the top of the wall. Less afraid in that instant of the men with the rifles than the one pursuing me with single-minded madness, but there was nowhere to go. If I leapt off the wall, I would certainly break something and be left easy prey. The stone crumbled beneath Rossi, giving me a fleeting moment of hope. He caught himself, though, and clawed for a new handhold, after which it was the work of mere seconds for him to attain the top of the wall. I retreated as far as I could, but it put me barely out of arm's reach, and there was nothing more behind me except a steep angle of broken rock and air. Rossi paused, securing his balance. The mountain wind tried to make a sail of my skirt. Soon it would carry me off of my own precarious footing, and he would not get the satisfaction of killing me after all. My attention was so fixed on him that I did not realize those tearing gusts of air were not solely from the wind until a shadow fell across us both. Chapter 24. The price of our victory. My reluctance to write. Rossi's notebook. Its possible consequences. Our departure from Vestrana. Jacob, and Lord Hilford's offer. Chapter 24. You may say it is pure fancy to think that the second dragon took Rossi and spared me because it somehow knew which of us was the enemy and which a friend. I will agree with you. The Vestrani rockworms are intelligent enough to carry their dead to rest in their great cavern, but they have not the slightest shred of affection for humans, nor any care to distinguish friend from foe. But fancy or not, I have no other explanation for how, when the shadow beat flapping off from the wall, Rossi was screaming in its claws, and I was left untouched. Even fancy cannot explain how I managed to avoid falling either. That I must attribute to divine providence. The chaos left Kurzov and Rossi both dead, along with two of their men. The others had fled. We were in the end saved by the dragons, a fitting revenge for their fallen brethren, and the boyar and his chemist were stopped. But the price of that victory had been so high. I sometimes think it had taken me a long time to write my memoirs because I knew I could not avoid speaking of Jacob's death. The grief, of course, had faded. The Vestrani expedition was decades ago, and I no longer weep into the pillow every night for his loss. But coming to terms with one's sorrow is one thing. Sharing it with strangers is quite another. And given how many of the events that led to his death can be laid at my feet, I was deeply reluctant to invite that sort of criticism that would, and still perhaps will, inevitably follow. I will not attempt to lay before you the pain I suffered then. I have said what I can. It is insufficient, but then I am a scientist and not a poet. My feelings are as strong as any woman's, but I lack the words to express them. It is not true what some say of me, that I never loved him. I have already refuted that argument. If it lacks the grand passion some demand, I will not apologize. I am who I am, and the sincerity of my affection, the worthlessness of my marriage are not things I care to debate. The worthiness of my marriage are not things I care to debate. Let me speak instead of what followed. We would not leave the bodies for the scavengers, not even those of our enemies. The horses bore those to the hut where we passed the night. The next day we returned to the village, and there Lord Hilford, Mr. Wilker, and Dagmira took on the inevitable task of explaining the matters to everyone. The reaction ranged from doubt to anger. The boyar was not loved, but we skirlings were even more strangers to the people of Drustanev than he was. No one was in a hurry to believe us, and furthermore, the explanation for the dragon attacks was not one that would be easily proven. Many people were also worried, very understandably, for what consequences might fall upon them as a result of Kurzov's death. I attended to none of it. The rockworms of Astoria bear their dead to the great cavern. We humans have our own rights, and those began upon a return. The old women of Drusenev left their sons and daughters to argue over worldly matters, and quietly went about their business of wishing and shrouding the bodies of my husband and my enemies. We buried them all. Oh wait, there's a picture here. And there we go. We have a picture of Jacob, her deceased husband. Wait, what was it? We buried them all the next day with ceremonies that would have offended a magisterial purist. But those ceremonies were all the comfort I had, and I was grateful for them. For all the differences of religion that lay between us and the Vestrani, I will say this for them. When it came to mourning, we were not treated as outsiders. I think everyone in the village came to visit while we sat Shiva, even if only if even if only from a sense of obligation, nor did we hold ourselves apart when the Sabbath interrupted our mourning. We attended Menkem's service in the tabernacle with nary a murmur of protest even from Lord Hilford. It's possible we offended them by our behavior after our Shiva ended. We felt we owed certain obligations to the village, though, and in discussion amongst ourselves, Lord Hilford, Mr. Wilker, and I agreed that it would be no insult to Jacob's spirit if we brought our work to a proper conclusion, rather than leaving at the first opportunity. It was different than it had been, of course. There was no tramping around the mountains collecting samples from dragon layers, but while Lord Hilford rode off to handle the matter of Kurzov's death, Mr. Wilker and I confirmed that the dragon carcass had been taken from the ruins to the graveyard, and we documented the latter as thoroughly as we could. We could not apologize to the rockworms for what had been done to their kin, but Mr. Wilker held a somber conference with Mashutin in the village and the village elders, and we hoped that would lay a foundation to prevent such difficulties in the future. We also studied Rossi's notebook as fervently as if it had been scripture. I had, of course, lied to the man about its fate. I would never destroy knowledge so recklessly. Mr. Wilker had enough chemistry to grasp the general outline, but I was entirely baffled by the attempts to explain why adding a solution of sulfuric acid to dragon bone, however slowly, whatever it was, whatever it was mixed with, wait, page just sticking together, could preserve anything. Upon one point, though, we were in perfect agreement. This knowledge is dangerous, I said to him one night as we sat by the light of a few candles in our workroom. Mr. Wilker's face was drawn and weary in the dimness. The things that could be built with dragon bone, Rossi was not wrong. There have already been minor wars over iron, and there will be more. We have too much technology that needs it, and hunger for more. Anything that could replace iron, much less improve upon it, is priceless. But harvesting the bone, if you will pardon the phrase, makes the dragons angry, which makes them attack people. To which the only solution is to hunt them more, I said. Between that and the demand for their bones, they will be driven to extinction. Kurzov and Rossi had already made progress towards that in this region. No wonder so many layers had been empty. Mr. Wilker paged slowly through Rossi's notebook as if brighter thoughts might leap from it. It may only work on rockworms. We know too little of dragon biology to be sure. Even if the process or the mourning behavior was specific to only the one breed, the effect would be catastrophic. People would pursue all dragons in the hope of getting something useful from their bones. Big game hunters would want trophies. Engineers would want bones for their inventions. It was hard enough when animals were wanted only for their pelts or ivory. This had the potential to be vastly worse. I hated the thought of destroying knowledge, but what if the alternative was even more unbearable? Mr. Wilker caught me looking at the book and must have read my mind, read my thoughts in my expression. It wouldn't do any good, he said warningly. Men have been trying to find a way to preserve the bones for some time. Rossi figured it out. Someone else will too. What are you saying? I asked sharply. That I should accept this as inevitable? Allow you to publish the contents of that notebook in the proceedings of the colloquialism philosophers and get it over sooner rather than later? A discovery of this sort could do what he so clearly craved and lift him above the limitations of his birth. No, no, of course not, he said, his own anger and helplessness so evident that they calmed my own. Concealing it at least defers the problem, and perhaps, I prompted, when he trailed off. Mr. Wilker sighed and laid his hands atop the notebook, staring as if sheer force of determination could make its contents more clear to him. Perhaps, in the interim, an alternative could be found. An alternative? Wait a second. An alternative? A different process would not eliminate the base threat to the dragons. He must, therefore, mean some method of... Oh, that is the word. No, what is the word? Synthesis, Mr. Wilker said. Artificially producing a substance that would have the properties of preserving dragon bone without any need to kill a dragon at all. He grew more animated as he spoke, sitting up in his chair and gesturing energetically enough that he almost knocked over a candle. Whatever it is that gets precipitated by the acid tiration, it must be the major component of dragon bone, but we could never analyze it because it breaks down so quickly in air. With a preserved specimen to work from, we can determine what element the molecule consists of and attempt to recreate them in a laboratory. Do you think it's genuinely possible? I asked, partly to stop him before he sank into a babble of chemical jargon I could not follow in the slightest. He sank back in his chair with a sigh. I'm sure of it. Someday. Whether we can do it so now, with the knowledge and tools we have, you would have to ask someone more qualified than I. It was reason enough to preserve the notebook. Without that, our hypothetical chemist would be set back by months, if not more. This way, we at least had a head start on anyone else rediscovering Rossi's process. Neither of us knew that night in Drusenev how vital the issue would eventually become. The aerial war and similar matters lay years in our future, but I do not claim undeserved foresight when I say that we saw trouble coming and did what little we could to prevent it. We speak of this to no one, I said, except Lord Hilford and whatever chemist you recommend. Mr. Wilker nodded, agreed. The Tsar of Buskovo was distracted enough by the deposit of firestones in Vestrani. For those mines so far, there were 19 of sufficient quality to be set in jewelry and dozens of smaller chips that he forgave Lord Hilford for the tragic loss of a boyar in a dragon attack. I thought 19 more enough than any one man to acquire at a single stroke. He did not need a 20th or a 21st. The stone I dug out of the ground beneath the ruins was sold discreetly later on, and the money sent by even more discreet means back to Drustanev. Sometimes, sometimes as coins, sometimes in the form of items useful for the village. It was one part apology, one part compensation for the temporary suspension of hunting, lest it attract angry dragons, and one part incentive for them to say nothing about Rossi's research. Also, if my husband must be buried in a foreign land, I wanted some form of tie to bind me to his resting place. The stone I found during my first visit to the ruins remained in my pocket, a reminder of too many things to count. We made our farewells in late Mises, packing up our belongings and loading them onto the cart of a trader we had paid to come to Drustanev just for us. Not everyone was sorry to see the backs of us. Of course, the villagers were more than ready to return to normalcy. Urjesh Mushaltan bid us a stiffly formal farewell with Menkem at his side. Astamir apologized for the 100th time. He had initially thought that the boyar's suggestion, a great joke, scaring the foreigners with the specter of Zangret Mott, but he had not reckoned with the fear it would evoke from his neighbors. I repeated the same forgiveness I had given him 100 times before. The rote words became less heartfelt every time I spoke them, but there was nothing to be gained by railing at him for his stupidity. Dagmira, I will not say she was reluctant to see me go, but she and I had achieved a kind of equilibrium, and I realized to my surprise that I would miss it. Thank you, I told her, as if I could not quite put into words what exactly I was thanking her for. She understood me regardless. I hope you at least got us a better boyar, she said, with the straightforwardness I had come to expect. He'll probably be just as bad, though. Another danged Buskoy stranger. And Iljish, the idiot, wants to go to school. There was a stone for Jindrik Gritelkin in the same field where Jacob and the others were buried, even though his body had never been found. By now, it would be anonymous bones, I suppose, stripped of the one item, his ring, that might have identified it. Although I had never met the man, I found myself in sympathy with him. It isn't necessarily a bad idea, I said, having someone educated to speak on behalf of Drustanev whenever a Rajesh is, whether a Rajesh or not. There could be a great benefit in that. What I did not say was that she and Iljish were already on the fringes of village life. Schooling would not mark him out much more, and it could give him something of value to bargain with. Dagmira only shrugged, kissing both my hands with perfunctory Vestrani courtesy, and walked off. And then, by slow stages, we made our journey back to Skirland. I did not suspect a certain change until we were on the ship, and was not sure of it until after we arrived back home. The symptoms might, after all, have simply been consequences of the stress of mourning and travel. But they were not. I gave birth to a son in late Ventus of the next year, and named him Jacob after his father. Of him I will say much more in future volumes. For now, I will limit myself to the unlovely admission that there were times, both during my pregnancy and after his birth, when he was less a source of joy and more a painful reminder of what I had lost. I risked falling once more into the depression that had gripped me after my miscarriage, and took comfort in intellectual work. I corresponded often with Mr. Wilker, making arrangements to find someone to study the samples of dragon bone, and I spent long hours transcribing our notes, finishing my sketches, and otherwise preparing the results of our expedition for public consumption. My marriage contract provided me provided for me generously enough to live on, but not enough to pay for the book's publication. Lord Hilford kindly overtook the subscription on its behalf. One afternoon, some 4 or 5 months after my son was born, the Earl paid me a visit in Pastorway and presented me with a finished copy. My fingers trembled as I brushed them over the green leather cover and opened to the title page. Concerning the rockworms of Vestrani, it read, and in small letters, the anatomy, biology, and activity, and particular attention to the relation with humans and the revelation of morning behavior, and then a short distance below the title, by Jacob Camhurst and others. It ought to have your name on it, Lord Hilford said bluntly, alongside his at the very least. Wait. Oh. We only have a few pages left, but we are running out of time. So I'm going to probably reread that thing. Anyways, we've been reading from A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent, is a book by Marie Brennan. And if you like this book, and if you like this content, rather, also, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, or if you want to join the Discord server, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.